All right, we're talking here about the real number system, which basically is just the way that we classify the different types of numbers that we use when we're doing mathematics. So the first group of numbers, or the first category of numbers that we talk about, is the natural numbers. We call those the natural numbers because those are the ones that occur most often in nature. They're the ones that when you first learned to count way back when on your fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, those are the natural numbers. So just the numbers that you use to count things, we call those the natural numbers. The next biggest category outside of the natural numbers is what we call the integers. Right, notice the box here, the purple box for the integers, includes that blue box of the natural numbers. Right, the natural numbers are a subset or a part of the integers. Right, so the integers are all of the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, also 0, and also the negatives of all those natural numbers. Right, so 0 and then positive and negative 1, positive and negative 2, positive, negative 3, and so on. Those are what we call integers. All right, so they're the positive and negative whole numbers is basically what the integers are. All right, the next biggest category of numbers outside of the integers is the rational numbers. All right, rational numbers, and again, notice that the black box here for the rational numbers includes the integers and the natural numbers. Right, so every natural number is an integer. Every integer is a rational number. Right, so the rational numbers are all of those positive and negative whole numbers, as well as any fraction, so 1/2, negative 2/3, any other fraction that you could think of as a rational number, any terminating decimal. Right, terminating means it comes to an end, so a decimal like 2.3, where it just ends after that 0.3, that is also a rational number. Right, and also any repeating decimal. The example I put up here is 0.57 repeated, so 0.57575757 that just keeps on going on forever. That is also considered to be a rational number. Right, what makes something a rational number is that you can write it as a fraction. Right, obviously fractions, 1/2 and negative 2/3, obviously those are fractions, you can write them as fractions. Right, natural numbers like 3, well, I could write that as 3/1 and make it look like a fraction. 3/1 just equals 3. That's why the natural numbers and the integers are also rational numbers, right? You can write them to look like fractions. Right, decimal numbers like 2.3, you can change that decimal number into a fraction. Right, 2.3, well, that's 2 3/10, which would be 23/10, and then 2.3 is now a fraction, 23/10. The 0.57 repeated, you can also turn any repeating decimal into a fraction. In this case, for the 0.57 repeated, if you put 57 over 99, that's that number in fraction form. All right. So those are the rational numbers. Rational coming from the word ratio, which means a fraction. Right. So any number that can be written as a fraction is considered to be a rational number. Right, including the integers and the natural numbers. Right. The other category of real numbers is what we call irrational numbers. Right, and notice, all these categories here, the natural, integers, rational numbers, they're all like nested within each other. Each one contains, or each one contains the other groups here. Like rational includes the integers includes the natural numbers. The irrational numbers are completely separate from all of those. There's no overlap between them. Right, so a number can either be rational or irrational. It cannot be both. Right, so a natural number, an integer, is never going to be an irrational number. Right, irrational numbers are ones that when you write them in decimal form, the decimal never repeats itself, it never terminates, it never ends. The decimal numbers just keep on going on and on forever. It's like a long string of digits that just keeps on going, there's no pattern to it, and it never stops. Right, so these numbers cannot be written as fractions. Right, basically that's what an irrational number is a number that you cannot write as a fraction that contains just integer numbers. Right, so a couple examples of irrational numbers: the square root of 2. If you were to convert that to a decimal, it's just a long string of decimals. So that's it. Square root of 2, or the third root of 7. Pi is an irrational number. E, which if you don't know what that is yet, you'll get to it eventually in algebra or precalculus. So those are examples of what we call irrational numbers. They're decimals that just never stop, never repeat themselves. There's no pattern to them. That's what we get. So pretty much any type of root that you take that doesn't come out to a nice whole number or a nice rational number or a nice fraction is going to be an irrational number. That's where most of our irrational numbers come from that we see as we go through algebra and precalculus and even calculus. All right, so that's the real number system. Basically, there's two categories: rational numbers and irrational numbers that don't overlap. Inside the rational numbers, we also have the integers and the natural numbers. That's it. Now, why this is important, And it doesn't come up a whole lot in algebra classes or pre-calculus classes where it's like, oh, just name me a whole bunch of irrational numbers, or, is this an integer or is this a rational number? You might see some problems like that, like when you're first learning this stuff, but afterwards it doesn't come up that much. But where this is important is you might see a problem somewhere down the road that says, oh, solve this problem and round your answer to the nearest integer. Well, if you don't know what an integer is, how are you going to write the answer to that question, right? Or it might say, let's talk about this irrational number here, and then blah, blah, blah. It talks about a bunch of other stuff in the problem. So you need to know what it means when it says an irrational number, right? These words do come up every once in a while as you're doing higher level math, so it's important to know what it is they're talking about when they talk about an integer or an irrational or a rational number. All right, so that is the real number system, the categories of numbers that we have.